I'm very happy to be here with you this morning, here with such a great gathering of people here in the RDS. And indeed to congratulate you and the people, the organisers. John Devaney, I know, is very involved in the organisation, have organised this so well. And the title, the theme for your weekend is, "This is my Son, the Beloved, listen to him." And that, of course, is from St. Mark, directly from St. Mark. It is referred to in all the Gospels. It is the words that were spoken when Jesus was baptized by John. A voice came out from the heavens that said, "This is my Beloved, my Saviour rests on him." And they are the words that God speaks when every one of us are baptized. God says, "This is my beloved daughter or my beloved son. Hear you him, hear you her, listen to her. My favour rests on her." And that is our privileged position as Christians. We are the beloved children of God. We are precious in his sight. He has called us by our name, and we are his. I believe that is my mission, and I believe it is the mission of all of you. I also believe that afterwards, when Jesus went up into the synagogue and he unrolled the scroll of Isaiah and he read from it, he read his mission. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has sent me to bring the good news to the poor, to bring liberty to the captives, and to set the downtrodden free, and to proclaim the year of God's favour." And then he rolled back the stone, Jesus did, and he sat down and he said, "This day these words are being lived. They're being fulfilled." And Jesus also gave us that mission as Christians. He has called us to read that scroll, read from Isaiah, and realize that that is our mission, to bring the good news. Or you can say it in another way, to bring God's mercy. But it is to bring the news of God, the mercy of God, the love of God, the peace of Christ, God, to the world. That is our mission. That is our only purpose in life. We can express it in different ways. That is our only purpose. So he has invited each of us on a journey. It is his journey. It's not our journey. It is his journey, and he invites us to walk with him in that journey. It's like the journey of the Old Testament, where the people walked from Egypt into the Promised Land, or the journey of the New Testament with Jesus. As you know, in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, that journey was never direct. In the Old Testament, they could have gone directly into the Promised Land from Egypt, but they didn't. They went by the Red Sea, and you know the story. The Red Sea closed in after them. They couldn't turn back, and they wandered for 40 years. And 40 years is just an expression of a very long time. It probably was longer time in the wilderness, and finally they entered the Promised Land. And it wasn't the people who started out that entered the Promised Land. Many of them died. Many people were born in the wilderness. So God's journey is never direct. God's journey is God's journey. And if it is direct and if it is simple, then it is our journey. And we do it our way, and we do it without God. And none of us like to do that. Many of us don't want to know the journey God has set for us. So we try to sidestep it in our own way. But God says to us that we are the beloved children and we are in his journey. And we know that God is with us. And that's the important thing. We know that on that journey we have God with us all the time. I will be with you. You are safe. I will be with you. He says it again and again. You see, it is particularly in the prophet Isaiah. He says, do not be afraid. How often does Jesus himself say, do not be afraid to us in the Gospel? But in the prophet Isaiah, he says, do not be afraid, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name, and you are mine. Should you pass through the sea, I will be with you. Or through rivers, they will not swallow you. Should you walk through fire, you will not be scorched. And the flames will not burn you, for I am your God, the Holy One of Israel. The waters will not drown you, and the fire will not scorch you, because God is with us. Because God is with us. That's the adventurous journey that we have as Christians, to follow, to walk with God, through fire, through water, through all kinds of troubles, because we all have very difficult times in our lives. But God says, walk with me, as the previous speaker talked about his journey. But only when he knew that God was with him, that he was able to get through his difficult times. And this is the same with all of us. And some people have great difficulty that turn away from God during their difficult times. So God invites us to walk with him, even though often there is no logic to it. There's no logic to what God asks of us. It makes no sense. So this morning I'll just take you a bit through John's Gospel, just to talk about that journey, and take just through the things that John did, or the things that Jesus did in his early part, in his early mission, which I think will show to us clearly what being the beloved Son means, and then what for us being the beloved children means, if we're to follow Jesus' way. It was very soon after baptism, people started to follow him. And first there were two. There was John and there was Andrew. They started to follow him, and he turned around and he said, what do you want? Jesus often asked that question in the Gospel. What do you want? And he asks us that question every day. What do you want? And do we know what we want? Do we know what we want? Do we know why we're here today? Do we know when Jesus says, what do you want, he's not saying what you want. He's saying, what is your deepest desire? What do you really desire? And the two fellows didn't know how to answer him. So they said, where do you live, sir? And he said, come and see. And that's what he says to us too. If you want to know what you want, come and see. Come with me. Listen to what I have to say to you. Just listen. Don't do all the talking. Just listen to me, God says. There are plenty of people who can talk. Just listen. And I will reveal to you. So they followed him. And next day, Andrew met Peter and Philip. He knew them. They were from Galilee. And he told them about Jesus. So you see, the role of Andrew was bringing people to Jesus. And that is another role for us, to bring people to Jesus. Not to bring people to ourselves, to bring people to Jesus. And they went to him. And then Philip met Nathanael. And Nathanael was a little suspicious, and he said to Jesus, how do you know me? And his way, that's a lovely question. It isn't, how do you know me? He told you about me. It is, how do you know me? How does God know us? And what does God feel about us? What does God think about us? How does he know us? That's was the question that Nathanael asked Jesus. And that's a very good question to ask God. How do you know me? How do you see me? What do you want me to do? And Nathanael joined them. And then, what did Jesus do next? He took his little band with him to a celebration. He took them to Cana. That's the first place he took them, to Cana, to the wedding. He took them to celebrate with other people, to rejoice with other people. Now, that isn't something that you'd expect somebody like Jesus to do. One of the first things to do is to take them to a wedding. And weddings, in the East and along the Mediterranean are weddings that go on from early in the day until next day. And people bring wines and all kinds of food to them. And they're wonderful celebrations. So he took them to a celebration to rejoice with other people. It's one of the things people have great difficulty in doing, is rejoicing with other people. Many of us can be very kind when people are down, but when people are in good form and something great happens to them, we are not so quick to rejoice, for whatever reason, and we all have our own reasons. But Jesus gave the example to the disciples. He wanted to rejoice with this couple in Cana. But he wanted to do more than that. He wanted to show the disciples that wherever you go and wherever you are, it's important to be attentive. Be attentive particularly for the vulnerable, for the weak. And in this case, it was to be attentive for the bride and groom that the fact the wine was going to run out. And that would have been one of the greatest embarrassments that would have happened in a wedding there, or indeed I'm sure in any wedding, but except you pay for your drinks in most weddings now, I think. There, they certainly don't pay for their drinks. It doesn't stop us from drinking. But it was to be attentive, to show that in the midst of our celebrations, we can still be attentive. And it is one of the times, we're least attentive. We're so caught up in ourselves. But then that was the point, really, in the Cana experience, that Jesus went to celebrate with others and to enjoy it, but not for himself alone. One of the things about marriages and weddings, when we go to weddings, people think of going and they think of, what will I wear, and what will I buy, and what will I, this sort of thing, and how can I wear the same outfit to this wedding because I wore it for the last wedding. And the most important thing about going to weddings, or going to marriages, is that we are going as witnesses. We are going to witness a marriage. And one of our responsibilities is to help that marriage to work. And very few people think of that. They never see themselves going to a wedding or a marriage to be a witness and to be a support. And it's one of the most important things today when we see marriages breaking down so frequently. And I wonder how many people who've been at their weddings, who have prayed for them during their marriage, and prayed for them in their times of difficulty. That is one of our obligations. Just as if you witness a baptism, or witness a confirmation, it is your obligation to pray for that person. And that's what Jesus was showing the disciples. That life isn't just about one little thing. The whole of life is about doing the work of God. Doing the work of God, and that is being of assistance to people, and showing the goodness and the love and the grace and the mercy of God wherever we go. After Cana, the next thing we find is Nicodemus. Nicodemus was an elder, I suppose you call him. He was a well-respected Jew, and he came to Jesus by night. Now, the people who come by night, the people who come by night, the people who are afraid to be seen with you during the day. Now, none of us like those kind of people very much. There's a name for them in Irish. They're called Sleeveens. And we all have a certain attitude towards them. And it's interesting to watch Jesus. Jesus was so open to people. He was so open to give people the opportunity to be converted. That was his mission, to bring people to the Father. He was so open to give. He sort of talked to him about he needs to be born again. And Nicodemus said, how can I be born again? How can I go back into the womb of my mother? He said, no, I'm talking about being born in the Spirit. being born by the Holy Spirit, being transformed. He said, he was talking to Nicodemus about moving from fear to trust. And it was very difficult for Nicodemus to understand it, but Jesus went to the trouble to explain it to him. And he said to him, "For God sent his Son to the world not to condemn the world, but so that through him the world would be saved." He sent his Son not to condemn the world, but so that through him the world will be saved. And that is our mission. Not to condemn the people who are afraid, like Nicodemus, the people who go by night, not to condemn them, but to show them that there is another way, to lead them to God, to get them to move from fear to trust. After that, Jesus went into Samaria and into Galilee. He had to go through Samaria. Now, the Samaritans, as you know, were a sect. They were a different group. They were totally rejected by the Jews. They were really, really outcasts. Nobody liked them, nobody wanted them, nobody spoke to them. They worshipped on the mountain. They didn't go to the synagogues. They were followers of Jacob, in a way. They had broken off. But there were all kinds of religious and political reasons why the Jews didn't like them. They were detested, rejected and detested. And I said, when we think of Samaritans, we must always ask ourselves, who are the people that we reject? Who are the people that society rejects? And we can identify people like travelers, people like homeless people, people like refugees whom they do reject. But we also all individually reject individuals. We don't want to be associated with them. And maybe it's because they're too radical or they're too whatever they are. So Jesus was going through Samaria and he stopped at the well that was called Jacob's Well. It was near the place where Jacob had given the land to his son Joseph. And there the disciples went off to get food in the village. He sat at the well, and we know the story well, that there he met this woman. She had come to draw water, and he was sitting there in the heat of the day, the afternoon, the very hot time of the day there. And he said to her, "Give me to drink." And she must have been in a state of shock that anybody other than Miss Barrister would speak to her. She was the wrong race, she was the wrong creed, she was a woman. And here this Jew was asking for a drink. She said, "Who are you, a Jew, asking me, a Samaritan, for a drink?" And he said, "If you knew who was asking for a drink, you would ask me for a drink, and I would give you living water, and you'd never be thirsty again." So she said, "Are you better than our father Jacob? You're going to give me some water that I'd never thirst again?" And he knew that she didn't understand what he was saying. So he said to her, "Go and fetch your husband." Jesus was so honest and so straight. He said, "Go and fetch your husband." She said, "I don't have a husband." And he said, "You're right. You've had 7 husbands. And the one you're with now is not your husband." And she said, "Are you a prophet?" And then he went on to talk to her about the living water, the meaning of the living water. It is quite an extraordinary story that Jesus would have chosen this woman, the most despised, the most rejected, the least important, and he would reveal to her his mission. That he would reveal to her what he had come for. He said, "I can give you living water, a living water that will bubble up inside you, that will bubble up into eternal life. It is really quite extraordinary. He says, if you only knew what God is offering, and who it is that is saying it to you, giving you a drink, you would have been the one to ask, and he would have given you living water. Whoever drinks this water will get thirsty again, but anyone who drinks the water that I shall give them will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give will turn into a spring inside you, welling up into eternal life. And she said, give me this water, so that I need never come back and collect water again, so I'll never be thirsty again. She really didn't understand the message, but as he went on, and he told her about her life, she began to realize there was something different about it. But he had this conversation with a woman who really couldn't have understood fully what he meant, couldn't have understood fully in the sense of a rational sense, in the sense of an intelligent sense. And yet she understood it in another way. Because she understood that he was different, and that he was saying to her that he had the power to give her a different life. I think it's one of the greatest stories in the Bible, because we are all taught that the people who can lead and who can do things like that are the people who are highly intelligent, who have greater potential, who have the powers of leadership. They're the people that can go and proclaim whatever is to be proclaimed. Here Jesus was telling this rejected outcast the good news of what he had come to bring the world. This living water, this new life. And she asked him a question in the middle of it. She said to him about, what do you think about worshipping? We say we should worship in the mountain, and the Jews say they should worship in the synagogue. And he said, and then I say to you, the day is coming, when it doesn't matter whether we worship in the mountain or in the synagogue. But what is important is that we worship in spirit and in truth. I mean, these are such profound words. And yet she understood, what did he do? When the disciples came back, she said, what are you doing talking to that woman? And she ran back to her village, shouting and screaming, and said, I have met the Messiah. He's told me all about me. And she started to get disciples. She was the first person to whom Jesus revealed that he was the Son of God. That is one of the most humbling messages of the Bible. To think of Jesus wasting time, and that's what it will appear to many of us, wasting time sitting at a well, talking to a poor outcast woman, and revealing to her that he was the Son of God. I mean, is anything so ridiculous? Is anything so illogical? But that's what it is, and that is the Jesus we're following. And that is saying to us, each of us have within us the capacity to be the disciples, to go out and bring the good news. Each of us, no matter what our background is, no matter what our experiences are, no matter what terrible things we've done in our lives, no matter how uneducated we are, or how educated we are, we have the capacity within us, because it's put within us by God, to be his disciples and to go out and declare that Jesus is God, and the God of unconditional love, the God of mercy. That is the message he gave to the Samaritan woman, and that's his message for us today. Next we find Jesus, the cure of the nobleman's son. This nobleman came to him and said, my son is very ill, he's in Capernaum, and I want you to cure him. And he was very persistent, he had this authority. And Jesus was not going to go to Capernaum, but he said to him, your son is cured. And the nobleman went back to his house, and his son had been cured to that house. And I think it was a great example again of Jesus' humility. Nobody knew there what Jesus had done. He was done quietly, there was no big show about it. He simply said, your son is cured. So the quietness with which Jesus moved was Jesus changed things. And the other place that Jesus brought his disciples, straight after that, was to another place where there were rejected people. Probably the most rejected people of all. It was the pool at Bethsaida. That was the Hebrew word for it. It was sometimes called the sheep pool, with its 5 porticos. And this was a place where all the people who were sick or lame or blind or deaf or were defective or deficient in any way, in mind or in body, people who were mentally ill, mentally defective, mentally handicapped, physically disabled, with all kinds of diseases, who suffered from all kinds of infectious diseases of different kinds. It must have been a horrific sight. If you can imagine any of the sights that we've seen on television, of the most horrific scenes of hunger and famine and disease. And this was worse, because this was then. And there were no cures for them. They were left there. They were left there at this pool which had possibilities for curing people when the waters changed. So, I mean, it was really what you call an asylum. Now, we all know asylums, and some asylums are terrible. Some asylums for the mentally ill in this country are terrible places, in spite of changes that have been made. Terrible in the sense that when you go in there, you're frightened. But this was all the people with anything wrong with them who were left there. And Jesus took his little band there into the middle of them. You can imagine what they felt like, walking amongst these rejected people. And Jesus said, he walked round, and then he saw this man, and he said to him, do you want to be well? Jesus didn't say to him, what do you want? It's interesting, because in many other cases you'll find in the Gospel Jesus says, the blind man, for example, at Jericho, he said, what do you want? Here he said, do you want to be well? Because he knew this man was depressed. This man said, look at me. I've been here for 38 years. And nobody has had time to lift me up, to put me into the waters when the water was turning. 38 years. And Jesus said, stand up. And the man stood up. And you can imagine what would be running through your practical mind if you went into a place like that. Can you imagine you going in and selecting somebody who'd been there for 38 years? Sick, depressed, or possibly all kinds of other things wrong with him. And he said, he just had to stand up. And the man stood up and he took his mat. And he walked away. And it was the Sabbath. And what happened? The minute he walked out with his mat and he met people said to him, you're not supposed to lift your mat on the Sabbath day. That's against the law. And he said, the man who cured me told me to lift my mat. He said, rise, pick up your mat. And then the Jews were raging. They were raging because he lifted his mat. They said nothing about the fact that he was cured. And you know, we're all a bit like that. We get into details about things. We get all caught up about details and things that are not a bit important. And we miss the most important thing in life. Because the most important thing in life is that people feel they're loved. And that we're able to radiate that love to them. That's the most important thing. It doesn't matter if they lift their mat on a Sunday or Monday or Tuesday or what they do. Really, the law of love is the guiding love. And yet we get so caught up in the details. Jesus' only message to us is to tell us that we're the beloved children of God. That our mission is to show that love. That mission particularly is to show that love to the most rejected and dejected of people. He's telling us God is not in the sky.